We are coming up on one of the busier racing weekends of the entire year. There are 4 Kentucky Derby prep races and 3 Kentucky Oaks prep races between Friday and Sunday this week. I say Sunday because some of the Santa Anita races now are moved to Sunday. And we will focus on this video about Aqueduct and their late pick 4 on Saturday, which is an all stakes pick 4. I had to get the services of a good friend of mine, the man who works for NYRA Bets. So that means not only does he cover the racing for NYRA, but he's also dishing out best bets throughout the week, making sure to entice you all to get to NYRA Bets. I'm talking about Matt DeSantis. How's it going, Matty?
Going great, man. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you about this great sequence, but just great to talk to you in general. And yeah, we got a really exciting all stakes pick 4 at Aqueduct and some really nice, pretty full fields and some, I think, good betting opportunities in this sequence.
Gotham is super intriguing, big field. While there may be a couple of shorter priced horses, they're not all that proven,
Yeah.
right? And Brad Cox has 4 in there, so all of them are live. It's an intriguing group, and it doesn't have necessarily one of the top 2 or 3 3-year-olds right now, but there's some talent in there. And then in the Busher, we have the runner-up from the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies making her debut.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's like I said, a lot of exciting horses. And that's a great way to characterize the Gotham, I think, is there might not be a horse that you go, well, this horse is going to be my Derby horse. But I think there are some horses in there who could end up being a Belmont horse or who could end up being potentially a horse we see up at Saratoga running some big races this summer. Because these are some horses that just got a late start and are just kind of starting to hit their stride and starting to mature. And I think we're only starting to scratch the surface with a few of these entries on Saturday. So yeah, really exciting day. And but as you said, exciting day across the country. You know, we got the Battaglia at Turfway, we got everything going on at Gulfstream, and then Sunday, like you said, the big cap in the San Felipe out at Santa Anita.
And I got to say, I'm in Southern California. I grew up 5 minutes away from Santa Anita. I like that they're doing this now because one thing I understand if it happens all the time, and there's been a lot of rain out here over the last 2 months,
Mhm.
like record historic
Yeah.
rainfall for this time of the year. It's been really bad, like right from the very beginning. But when you're supposed to have a big day of racing and some good races on the grass and quality racing, that Kentucky Derby points may be up for grabs for some of these horses, I have no problem pushing it to a day where you know there's not going to be any rain and just
Yeah.
making sure that you're going to get that in. You don't have to worry about the middle of the day where there's scratches and changes, surface switches. We're wondering who's in, who's out. Are these horses going to run? Everyone's handicapping has to switch. Now everybody knows Saturday, we're going to focus on Aqueduct and Gulfstream Park and other tracks. And then Sunday, now we'll all get to kind of have a focus on Santa Anita and their good card.
Absolutely. And then Saturday and then Sunday's card is going to get run on Monday, which will make Monday all that more fun, to handicap Santa Anita on that day. So, yeah, I don't mind it as well. I mean, if it's just a postponement, that doesn't bother me in the least. I mean,
Yep,
when you don't lose, as long as you're not losing racing days,
exactly.
I'm okay with it. And, you want to see horses run under optimal conditions. And, I say that as someone who spent the entire summer up at Saratoga where
The
we
worst
faced a
luck
record
ever.
amount of the worst luck you could imagine. And, unlike Santa Anita at Saratoga, because it's a boutique meet, you can't really postpone much because you run Wednesday through Sunday. So you can't really push things around too much.
Nope.
And as a result, we had to take a lot of things off turf. Obviously, we had to seal track a lot, and it just led to smaller fields. And it was, obviously a challenging summer in that regard, and a lot of other ways too. But it was, but so I respect what they're doing out there, and you want to give people the best possible product, and that's the way you're going to do it.
So really cool weekend of racing coming up. One of the busiest of the entire year when it comes to
Yeah.
different tracks all having big races starting on Friday night at Turfway Park. You're going to have a points race up for grabs in the Cincinnati Trophy for fillies in the Oaks. So there'll be points up for grabs there. And then on Saturday, we'll have a couple at Fairgrounds has a couple stakes races, but really Gulfstream with their 9 stakes races. Turfway has a points race in the Battaglia, and And then we get to Aqueduct with the 4 stakes races and all stakes pick 4 to close things out. We're going to dive into the daily racing form past performances. Matt actually posted a really cool DRF formulator stat that's actually a little teaser for the first race that we're going to talk about, which is the Busher. So if you're like Matt, if you're like me, if you're like a lot of folks out there who like to use those DRF past performances, make sure you get to drf.com. You can get those PPs every day for Aqueduct, for all the tracks you're playing. And for Aqueduct, you can get DRF picks and more throughout the meet as we get ready to talk all stakes pick 4. So, Maddie, race number 7 is where the stakes action gets started on Saturday, and we get things going with the Busher, which is the 1-turn mile. So this is a 3-year-old filly points race, and Jody's Pride was the runner-up in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. We'll actually see Jody's Pride and the horse who beat her, Just FYI, both return on Saturday in different prep races. Just FYI will be a logical contender in the Devona Dale down at Gulfstream Park, but both of them, and anytime you have horses like this at this time of the year, it at least has to be said that these are talented horses who did their best work at 2. They're making their first start of the year. This is not the end goal for them. They want to be ready for the Kentucky Oaks. And on the opposite side, some of these horses, fillies and the colts, they're really good and precocious at 2, and they don't quite take that next step forward at 3. So when you have really short price horses like this to start, you have to at least mention those things. And then you got a really great stat looking at Formulator.
Jody's Pride, obviously overwhelming favorite in this race at 4-5. But to your point, coming off a really substantial layoff, having not run since that Breeders' Cup weekend. And so I wanted to see how was trainer Jorge Abreu at bringing horses back into an aggressive spot, into a non-graded stakes or a stakes race after this. And amazingly, Jorge Abreu over the last 5 years is 0 for 51 with horses coming off a 100 to 180 day layoff. And when I narrowed it down, even to look at stakes races and graded stakes races, I mean, obviously the 0 doesn't change, but it's still a pretty substantial denominator. So you still end up with 0 for 16 in graded stakes races, 0 for 24 in graded and non-graded stakes races. So, he just does not have a lot of success bringing horses back from a long layoff and kind of lets them run into shape a little bit. And, this horse has had a couple of nice works, admittedly, down at Gulfstream Park leading up to this race. But I think as a legitimate question mark, as a 4-5 favorite, the speed figures would tell you that she's not an overwhelming favorite in this field, that she doesn't possess a huge advantage.
She has one race, which was her last race, where she has the better speed figure than anyone, but it's not that overwhelming. And prior to that, her numbers are right in the mix with everybody else's.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing that's, I think, going to be important to point out is, there's going to be rain on Saturday at Aqueduct. There's an 80% chance for showers, and it's going to be kind of raining throughout the day. So there's a likelihood of a sealed track. She's never run on a sealed track. She's never run on an off track. So that's a question. How will she handle that? Mm-hmm. Some horses handle it really well. Some don't handle it well at all. And so for me, I'm going to try to beat a 4-5 favorite, especially coming off that long of a layoff. And, you look, there's a couple of horses, a horse like Gin for Brad Cox, who won the Busanda going 1 1/8, notably did it over a muddy sealed track and has run pretty well over an off track. And you're getting 4-1 on that horse. Even a horse like Regulatory Risk for Chad Brown, breaking from the inside rail, would need to get a little bit faster. Just broke its maiden last time out. But you look at who this horse ran against the last 2 times out, ran against Tarifa, who we saw win the Rachel Alexandra last time out, the grade 2. So, I mean, she's been running against really good company. And even a horse, I think, like Sicilian Princess for William
That's Walden, who I like. I'm throwing her in the mix for sure.
Yeah, at 8-1, I think that's a great horse. I mean, nice debut speed figure. And I actually love the all-weather synthetic to off-track angle. If you tell me that it's going to be an off track, I love those synthetic horses. going to an off track. So that's one coming up from Turfway Park I'm really interested in.
I think we have very similar approach in here. I'm going to try to beat Jody's Pride. You mentioned Jin Jin, super logical, especially if you're someone trying to beat Jody's Pride. She makes just so much sense. That was a good effort last time out. Intricate is super nice filly. She came back and she made a nice debut for her first start of the year, and she'll be really sharp, a lot sharper, making her second start back. She'll be at the fairgrounds, I think in the Fairgrounds Oaks, when we see her next, just a couple of weeks from now. So Jin Jin's in the mix for sure. Sicilian Princess, though, that debut race on February the 14th, she was a step slow from the rail, but then she pushes up inside to fourth, and she's only sitting 2 lengths off at the very most. She's just behind the leaders. She waited. She moved through nicely, but the 8-5 favorite had already opened up that day. She ends up winning the battle for second. So I like that there were a few horses around her, and she got game, and she won that battle. She's also a half to a nice horse named Dreamlith, who was a grade 2 winner. You can take a look at the Formulator past performances right here. See, Dreamlith won the career debut. They put in a grade 1 company a couple times, finished behind Echo Zulu and Juju's Map, and then came back and won the Golden Rod. So a quality horse who showed some precocity and was just good early on. And Sicilian Princess is now moving from 6.5 to a 1-turn mile. That's not that, right? That's not going from 5 to a mile and an eighth. You know,
Right.
that stretch out, while you feel like, yeah, it's going from a sprint to a route, it's not that big of a step up. And as you pointed out, Turfway, the synthetic surface there, can be kind of tiring. I've also pointed out a few times, there's not any real science or math to this, but I guess a little bit based on the times of races. But just in general, you're not seeing like the monster efforts on synthetic surfaces, and the speed figures are a little bit lower, right? So those races are a little less fast. They're not as quick early or quick internal fractions, so you don't get the huge speed figures. So my point in that is, I think sometimes horses come out of maybe a Turfway or a Woodbine, and their races might be a few points higher than what a speed figure would suggest, just based on a surface when they move to dirt. I think there are a lot of little things to like about this horse, and if she's in the 6-1 or above range, it's probably pretty fair for her.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing to point out that I really like about her is that, she'll track the pace, and there's going to be a significant amount of speed in this race, because you would imagine regulatory risk is going to go from the inside rail.
Yep.
And then you can see Princess Mayfair going, Aofi's Magic is going to send, and Carmelina is going to send. Well, that's 4 horses in a 7-horse race that are going to want to go to the front.
Yep.
So I prefer to play that tracking trip, which has historically been the kind of right trip to have at Aqueduct in the 1-turn mile. Not a lot of gate to wire winners, a lot more winners sitting just off the pace. So that's why a horse like Jin Jin or Sicilian Princess, I think, are more intriguing, because you can get, I think, a little bit better trip for them because of the way the pace scenario is going to potentially play out.
Yeah, they really could sit nicely just behind, let it develop in front of them, maybe get the jump or try to force Jody's Pride a little bit wide. If that's the case. And yeah, you pointed them out, but you have 2 horses that are kind of similar to mention, because they're just really sharp, really fast horses that have done it against a little softer company, and they'll now step up. They'll get the acid test. The number 5, Aofi's Magic, who's undefeated. She's done all of her work over at Parks. She's done most of it against Pennsylvania breds, but she did beat Open Company in one race, and to the benefit of, anyone that backs her, she does have multiple races on and off track. So if it is raining, that's definitely a plus for her. Carmelina, kind of similar. Like, you look through her whole form, it makes sense overall. She didn't run well going long on the grass. The other 4 wins came in softer spots, and when she faced tougher at Saratoga, it was a little much for her, but super honest fillies that they, their connections figured, not a big field. These horses have speed, so right off the bat, they can be in the mix. So you give them a shot and you take a swing here.
Absolutely. And I'll just say this about Carmelina. Butch Reed brought up a horse that a lot of people didn't give a chance, Uncle Heavy, in the Withers, who ended up winning that race and is now pointed to the Wood Memorial. I mean, Butch Reed's always got good horses, and when he ships up from Parks, they run honest. And, that I know sometimes people are skeptical about Parks' form at Aqueduct, and I think it depends on the trainer. But when Butch brings his horses up, they run. And that horse is, and to your point, it's a 1 turn mile. So these horses that are 7 furlong, 6.5 furlong horses, the configuration is going to be the same. Yes, I know technically it's a route, but the configuration, the way you're going to run this, the winning trips, that it all replicates the type of efforts that you do in sprints most of the time. And so, having a horse on the far outside, you keep Michael Sanchez aboard, and that's a jockey who's ridden her before, 3 times before. All of them have been victories for Carmelina, and he's going to have the benefit of sitting that outside post and kind of judging the pace scenario and being able to slot her in where she needs to, but or just going to the front, if maybe some other don't break quite as sharp. So I respect those connections, bringing horses up here and taking a shot, and you might as well.
And it's Carmelina too, speed figures wise, she's not overmatched.
No,
with
not at all.
some of her better races. Aofi's Magic needs to step it up a little bit, on speed figures to compete with this group in what's very intriguing Kentucky Oaks points race to kick off an all stakes pick 4. I'm with you, Matt. 1, 2, 3, definitely on my tickets in pick 4, in the pick 4. And I'm going to try to beat Jody, I think. I may throw in one more, but it'll at least be the 3 inside horses, I think, in here. Okay.
No, I think so. And that's going to be the key is, use a few horses to try to beat her. And I think she's vulnerable in this spot. And, you don't get many 4 to 5 favorites that are vulnerable. But from a pick 4 standpoint, you get past this one, suddenly that ticket's going to pay a lot better, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to single a horse like her and try to spread in some other races. But you can beat a 4 to 5 favorite, you're going to cash a nice ticket.
And you know what, where it is, we can play this aggressively, come back, you get knocked out, you play a pick 3, and with the way that Gotham could play out, it still could be a nice exotic. So I'm always, and I know you are too, more in the play aggressively, you lose, you move on and play again, then, hey, let's play it safe and use her and the other 3 along with her. That's just not ever the smart gambling maneuver,
No,
to
I would agree.
Defensively in that situation. So let's move to the second leg of the pick 4 sequence. This one is the Stymie, $150,000 up for grabs. This is a 1-turn mile for older horses. A couple horses in here that are kind of sharp, but they're just maybe right below graded stakes levels. Petulante is a graded stakes winner, but this is a horse who's making his first start since June. So they're being a little more cautious with him. He was actually supposed to run, was it last week?
Last week, yeah, against our boy Law Professor.
Yeah, and then they end up rerouting here. So Petulante, pretty tough to knock his overall form. And what's been nice about him in his more recent races, as he's gotten a little bit older, he's really shown that he can sit off the pace, relax a little early if someone else wants to go, and then move to the lead. And he defeated some nice horses. Like Nimitz Class is a really hard-knocking type horse. Trademark has won some strong races. So super logical contender in here. Makes a ton of sense. It's a good starting spot for him. Castle Chaos would have been a player in the Gulfstream Park Mile down at Gulfstream Park, which came up a little light this year. But he's actually equally a top player in this race too. His string of 5 races or 6 races in a row are all pretty good. They're tough to knock. And what you can kind of see in his form too, he had that long layoff to deal with. He showed some ability early in his career, long layoff to deal with. So just eliminate those races right in the middle from, the last 2 races before he's sent to a year break. He comes back and he just takes a couple races to kind of get going, but you see him run pretty much well from the entire time he comes back off the bench. And then he's just taken some nice steps forward in his last few. It wasn't even like he only won on a muddy or a sloppy track, and that's why he has the big race or a big figure. He's been pretty consistent, different tracks. He went over to Gulfstream, now comes back to Aqueduct. He's logical with his recent form.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're right. Those last 3 races in particular, 96, 94, 97 by our speed figures, his effort in the Fred Hooper last time out to Tubarumba, really strong. And then, of course, you look back at the Cigar Mile. He handled a muddy sealed track, finished 3rd in the Cigar Mile, to a horse that we just saw win. Oh, I don't know, just the most richest race in the world in Senior Buscador.
Yeah.
So
and even came back and run well. Like Senior Buscador is just nice. He ran second in the Pegasus, right? His form overall, that third is very good.
Yeah.
And nobody was passing that day. That was that crazy track where nobody passed. And we've seen how many horses now finish out of that race and come back and run well. It's exactly what happened with him. He came back the next race and almost won the Hooper.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, he answered the question, he can run off Lasix, because that was a little bit of a question going into the Cigar Mile. But, those last two efforts are very legitimate. Like you said, he's done it over a fast track, muddy track, doesn't matter. He's handled the mud okay. I actually kind of prefer him over Petulante.
Yeah, I think so too.
Bit.
He's pretty versatile too. With his, like, he can sit a little closer than, just because that last race looks like he was a little farther back, but he's kind of wide and in between. He's got a little positional speed, especially at a mile, where I wouldn't be shocked to see him placed, third or fourth. And that's the one thing you notice with. There's another horse I'm going to point this out on in just a minute with Dylan Davis. What I've been so impressed with him, because I don't watch the circuit every day as much, but when I do, and now you watch every race every day over in New York, but when I am watching, and then even when I haven't seen and I'm watching replays and handicapping for a day, how much he's able to get horses to show really good tactical speed and positional speed. And even when he didn't win on this horse a couple starts back, he put him in a really good spot.
Yeah, when Dylan rides more aggressively, he is so good. And it took him a little while of this meet, I think, to get his feet under him. But he's been really hot over the last month or so. And he's been just giving phenomenal rides on different horses. There's a horse in the next race coming up. I want to talk about the ride he gave on that horse last time out, because it was really good. But yeah, I think he's got that positional speed. The other thing to point out, Petulante, trained by Rick Dutrow Jr., Dutrow is
a little cold, right?
Very cold. 1 for 27 at Aqueduct the last 28 days. So not particularly hot at all. And, definitely something to keep in mind. And I'll mention Petulante was a vet scratch last week. And so, I'm a little concerned. We'll see how, effective he is off the bench. He's run well off the bench before in his career. So, he's been able to handle long layoffs. But at 5-2, a short price.
And is the case with a lot of these Dutrow horses in this stretch you're looking at. Short prices, under 2-1. Bunch of these horses under 4-1, under 2-1, 5-2, not even 2-1 in these horses, 8-5. A lot of shorter prices here in the last, 6 weeks, 2 months, where he hasn't had that great stretch. And this is, again, going to be a short price horse coming into the barn for the first time, which has always been where they have success, but big plans maybe throughout the year. If this horse was a little short and ran second and then jumped up into a graded stakes race next time out, that wouldn't be all that surprising at all.
Not at all. Not at all. And I'll be honest, the other horse that I'm a little interested in, I don't know how you feel about this horse, is the number 4 Coastal Mission. This is a horse that's interesting to me. This horse, ran at Charlestown basically all the time and came up here to the Cigar Mile. You mentioned the conditions that day, broke from the inside rail, which is always tough. Didn't necessarily break great either. This horse usually breaks on top and just takes from gate to wire. Didn't really break there great, was a little bit behind, and then just didn't really finish out the trip. But that was way above his head. This is a much more gettable field for this horse.
Absolutely.
And at 9-2, those are more reasonable odds.
He has speed. He can sit. He's proven on an off track. The races that I went back and watched just because I wanted to see kind of how they developed were the races where he got in a little bit of trouble back in June at Charlestown, because I did just like seeing that he can sit off the pace a little bit with the way that Charlestown 7 furlong races are too. That will play out sometimes where you have to, when you're sitting behind horses like that with the multiple turns. So Coastal Mission, the two that I wanted to mention were him and the 3 Double Crown right next door. Who I think is just very honest overall. And Double Crown, and the unfortunate thing though for him, he's not really one that you upgrade as much on a wet track. He has some okay races on it, but he's just noticeably better on a fast track than he is on a wet track.
Yep.
Overall, on a fast track, he's been remarkably consistent. And with his running style, it just makes sense that he doesn't quite win as much as he finishes second, and third. It doesn't mean he's not a winner, or it doesn't mean he's a horse who, if he's close up, he's not going to win. It just means he's not fast early as some of the other horses. So he just doesn't get to dictate his own trip in a lot of these races. He needs some pace to run at. If he gets it here, if we get Kinetic Sky, having to show a little bit of positioning down inside, we're definitely going to get Laughing Boy, I think, forwardly placed in here. Coastal Mission is going to want to go. And then it depends on what Petulante does from the outside. Those horses, if we get, 2 to 3 of them forwardly placed, then it can open things up for him. I like him as a horse overall. It just may not be on the wet track with the way this race shapes up. But he's not outclassed in here. I just don't know if all the conditions will be necessarily for him on Saturday.
Yeah, he's a horse I took a real long look at, and you're right, really consistent and a nice horse, and one I really like, and has kind of run well at this level. But you're right, has not handled the off track necessarily that well the last few times out. And we'll just have to wait and see. Obviously, weather forecasting is less predictable than handicapping, and so
Yep.
we says 80% chance of rain on Saturday. Might be sunny. Who knows? But it's, I think from a handicapping standpoint, you're right. That's one, if you're seeing a sealed track, that's certainly something to keep in mind. And one other thing I'll just mention before we go any further is, in addition to, taking to a sealed track or not, one thing to pay attention to at Aqueduct is the rail. So really when there is weather, it is so important. I encourage players, watch those early races and see if the rail is either beneficial or a hindrance to horses. And whether horses are just getting carried home on the rail or whether it looks like they're spinning their tires out in the middle of the track, because that can have a huge impact on this as well. Because at some point you also, and then also pay attention to which jockeys are adjusting to those conditions quicker than others. That can really be a nice way to catch a winner later in the card.
And we're lucky because nowadays with social media, some really smart people that follow these tracks and cover the races there, like a Matt DeSantis, like a David Aragona, that are on Twitter and that let us know, hey, keep an eye on this bias right now. It seems like the first 4 races, there's been no passing and all these horses have been within one path of the rail. Right.
Exactly.
And they'll let us know. And then if maybe you weren't even really, you kind of had it on in the back, but just keep an eye on that now. And pay attention because they will really help you. And if that's the case, take that into account when you're handicapping the late pick 4. But you'll have plenty of sample size with those first 6 races on the card to see, hopefully, what the track is playing like.
Yep.
Okay, that's a look at race number 8. Let's move to the second half of the pick 4 sequence as we have a couple graded stakes races coming up. First up, it's the grade 3 Tom Fool, 6 furlongs on the dirt. What makes this race pretty interesting is I feel like Super Chow, at 7-2 is very logical. I feel like Rotney probably a little short for wanting to play him at 9-5, but he comes off of a big win last time out and he lost to Bold Journey a couple times. He's been in really good form. So it's tough to knock his last real 4 or 5 races overall. But it's not as if anyone scares the heck out of you in this race. I think they're deserving, like logical horses that are going to be the shortest prices in here, but nobody just terrifies you.
No, not at all. I felt much the same way about this race. And, I mentioned the Babe Dutrow stat last race. I'll mention the David Jacobson one this race. Jacobson, who was just absolutely on fire to start 2024, is 3 for 35 the last 27 days at Aqueduct. And so that's a barn that obviously has 2 entries here, both Stage Left and Durante, and or Durante, I should say, named after good old boy Jimmy Durante. But both those horses trained by David Jacobson. So that's something to keep in mind. This one, it's interesting. We talked about Super Chow last time I was on with you. And we were both kind of a little not sure about Super Chow's chances.
He ran really well.
We got to walk the dog up front. He did exactly what we
were hoping he wouldn't. Look how slow they went to the half mile going 7 furlongs that day.
Yeah. And so he walked the dog and he got the distance, and that was a great job by Maddie Oliver, and it was her first graded stakes win, and that was a really cool moment. Her dad was there, and it was very very neat to see. Um, but I'll be honest, a horse like Maniwa is really interesting to me in this spot.
He kind of feels like the classiest, like just the most proven horse of all
Yeah,
of these horses that like at level, just at this type of a level. A lot of these other horses are they're on the upswing or they're not quite as like stakes level horses. He's not been a win machine throughout his career, but again, that
no,
has to do with his running style.
it does, and this race sets up for him because
Yep.
unlike the last time out, unlike in the toboggan, there's a ton of speed in this race. So this is why I don't like Super Chow in this spot,
No.
because you have the number one downtown Charlie Brown who's going to show. The number
Yep.
two certainly is going to go. Listen to your heart. Super Chow is going to go. We
Yep.
know Rodney's going to go, and Durante's going to
Yep.
try to go, though he's not been quite as fast in some of his recent starts. So there's going to be a lot of speed. What I loved about what Dylan Davis did last time, and now they have a different Rafael Vasquez is up this time. But what Dylan did last time I thought was so smart, which Manny Juan normally is this deep closer. Dylan knew exactly how the track was playing and got that horse out sitting within a length and a half of the lead at first call. That's exactly what he needed to do. He gave that horse as good a chance to win as possible. And he finished second simply because he's running against the track in incredibly slow fractions. Now we're cutting back in distance. We're getting those fast fractions that are going to be set up in front. This sets up for a race potentially where Maniwa can make that run from off the pace like he normally does. And you're going to get 8-1 now on the morning line. That's an honest price on that type of a horse, I think.
Yeah. Vasquez, I think did you say Rafael? I think it was Ramon. It's Ramon.
Oh, yeah, Ramon. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Because
I
was thinking
Rafael Hernandez win earlier.
Yeah.
Today.
Well, and I was thinking because I was like, the one thing that you were going to point out, which the same point you were going for, is one that I realized watching him in Southern California. He's a really, really good speed rider. That's why he did so well at Oaklawn Park too. And he does a really good job of just getting horses. That doesn't mean every horse. I'm not saying he's going to put Manuel on the lead.
No,
but he gets more speed out of horses than they have, or he puts them into better spots. And that's what you're hoping with the horse like Maniwa. And that's exactly what I'm hoping with the horse who I like in here, 24 Mamba, who's just in really good form. And that's the one that Dylan Davis goes to. And if you'll notice, he was a horse who he was fine, claiming like into allowance ranks, but he wasn't. He didn't have a lot of early speed, and that would hurt him in a lot of his races where he was just too far back and he just would lose some focus early on. And then the last couple races when Dylan has been aboard, he has shown so much better positional speed with this horse, and he's just been a different horse. It's not as if his numbers are so far above what some of his better races were before, but it just goes to show you when you're involved more in the race and you sit a better trip, what can happen. He gave himself so much less work to do in those races based on where he was placed. And now he's going to cut back a little bit to 6 furlongs. But as you pointed out, with how this race shapes up, even if he is more like 4 to 5 lengths behind early, I think it could still set up pretty well for him. And I think right now he's in really nice form. So I'm going to use him in my pick 4 too, because I think he could get a really nice trip in here.
Couldn't agree more. I think that makes all the sense in the world. A horse that has, you're right, flashed a little bit better speed. Dylan's done a great job with him the last couple of times out. And the thing about him is you usually get an honest price on this horse too.
Yeah.
So, you'll get a good price on him. And like I said, I think this horse can, he's only had 2 races over a wet track, and those were really before he's kind of recaptured this recent form. So I wouldn't read too much into that. And he's a horse that I think at 8-1 on the morning line. Yeah, I'd love it if he could get that price, even down to 6-1. I think that's a good play. And you're right. There's nobody in this race that really overwhelms you or scares you. So I think this is a leg where you can really take a little bit of a swing at a big price and feel pretty good about maybe, leaving some of these other shorter prices horses off your ticket.
You kind of described it perfectly right off the bat. There are versions of this race where there might be 5 horses all trying to get really good early position. They could all compromise each other, and 3 of them will likely be the 3 shortest prices in this race.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's right now, win or lose in this pick 4, and we could be dead wrong in our analysis, but what's been fun about the first 3 races and how we've handicapped it is we feel like there's a vulnerable favorite in the first leg. And in this race, we feel like there could absolutely be a couple of prices, as you and I are both pointing out, horses that are 8-1 on the morning line that could get really nice setups in here. And win or lose, I like feeling this way going into a sequence instead of going, that favorite really does kind of stand out. Like I might try to use one other horse, or, you kind of talking yourself into it. We feel like there are really logical chances for, some vulnerable favorites in this sequence in at least 2 of the first 3 races, and then a wide open Gotham afterwards.
Absolutely. No, it's like I said, it's a fun sequence. I hope people play it because it's one where, it's funny. It's also one where you can take a shot, like you said at the beginning. All right, you bust out of the pick 4, we'll run it back in the pick 3. You bust out of the pick 3, run a daily double. You can get a price in this sequence. It's just about where it's going to hit, but you can absolutely get a price in this sequence because, these are anything but lock stock favorites. I mean, these are favorites that I think you can try to get around and try to beat. And from a speed figure perspective, a horse like Rodney, last 3 races, 91, 90, 90. I mean, those aren't overwhelming numbers. And quite frankly, they're right in line with where everybody else is, if not a little bit behind. So, that's your 9-5 favorite. I'll gladly play against that horse.
And we'll hopefully be alive moving into race number 10, which is the grade 3 Gotham. $300,000 up for grabs, a 1-turn mile, and Kentucky Derby points on the line for these 3-year-olds. And Brad Cox has a very strong hand in this one as we look to 4 of the runners in this field, starting with the number 6 Air Cav, who is the longest shot of them. He was 3rd in the Winkfield, well behind Bergen, who is another Brad Cox runner. He's really talented when you just look at his overall form. It's tough to knock what he's done wrong. He has 1 poor performance. It wasn't even poor. He finished 2nd that day. He's won his other 2 very, very nicely. Brad Cox has the 5-2 morning line favorite in Just a Touch, who won by 4.5 lengths or 4.25 lengths in that sloppy track debut on January the 27th, earned an 89 Beyer speed figure, but he will have to stretch out from 6 furlongs to the mile. And then right next door is Light Line. He had a little sneaky trouble in the Withers that shuffled him back, but he finished 3rd in the grade 3 Withers as the favorite. So 4 Brad Cox runners just to start the conversation with here in the Gotham, Matt.
Yeah, I think the best value out of those is probably Bergen at 9-2.
Yeah.
That's a nice horse. That's a really nice horse. And, you're right. You can't argue with that form. And the only time he lost was stretching out to a 1-turn mile in his 2nd race. And he finished 2nd that day to a horse called Houday, who is back in training now at Turfway Park. But that's a horse that's a perfect 4-for-4. And that race produced the Southwest winner, Mystic Dan.
Yep.
So, I mean, Bergen finished 2nd that day, came back, won the Winkfield. Cox might just think this is a sprinter, and he's trying to kind of get him some Derby points. Because if you look at the pedigree underneath, it's a lot of sprint influence. But it's one of those things where this is the perfect race for him because it's a 1-turn mile.
And this is kind of the last short spot
it is
that you got, right? And I'm glad you're hitting that because you can see it with a couple of these horses to where maybe they won't win the Derby, but it's a great stepping stone progression spot. If you think they might be able to, let's put them in a spot where we know distance won't be the reason they get beat in this race. And that shouldn't be why this horse gets beat in this race, I don't think.
Exactly. And so, it's a 1-turn mile setup. You go from 6 to a mile. The horse already demonstrated he ran well at a mile. It was gaining ground at a mile, we should say. It wasn't like he was fading at a mile in a 2nd start. He was making up ground. He also comes from off the pace, which I think is a really important thing to point out because there's going to be a lot of speed in this race. And so I like a horse coming from off the pace a little bit. And I think Bergen at 9-2 provides some really nice value. Listen, Just a Touch did absolutely nothing wrong in debut, handled it off track as well, which is going to be useful for what's taking place on Saturday from a weather perspective. But 5-2 in a 13-horse field is sometimes a tough pill to swallow, and especially when there is this many other runners. But those 2 Cox horses kind of stand out above the other two pretty substantially, both from a morning line and I think just from an overall form perspective. But there's some other really interesting horses in here. A horse like Deterministic for Christophe Clement coming back from a really long layoff. Is
That
a
race
horse
was impressive. His debut race was
Yeah.
really impressive. Deterministic. It shows that they're very confident putting him in a spot like this without even a prep race before it. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him run well in this race. It runs second or third, and then a horse that you play back in the wood or in the next prep somewhere. He definitely has ability. The horse I wanted to mention, because I think you're right. I think Bergen and Just a Touch they're the highest ceiling of the cocked horses in here.
Right.
If they were to show up with their best efforts and get their trips and run with their A game races, they'd probably be pretty tough. But I sort of feel like it sounds like you do. I prefer Bergen of the two of them, just with the way the race shapes up. I'm a little worried that Just a Touch could get caught up with that pace you were talking about just going inside to outside. You got Canante, who will probably be forwardly placed in there. I'd imagine even with the blinkers coming off from the inside draw, you want to hold that position. You got Maximus Meridius stretching out here. You've got Facenda, who's coming out of a 5.5 furlong race and looks like a total long shot, but might just at least be part of the pace and be another pace rival up there to make things quick. El Grande O is going. He ran Too Good to Lose last time out. That was a wicked beat. He looked like he was home free, and then Uncle Heavy nailed him right on the money. He will be forwardly placed in there. And then you've got Just a Touch, who is coming out of a 6 furlong race. He's drawn to the outside. He's going to have to be forwardly placed as to not get wide. And then you got Slider, who's really quick too, coming in from Southern California. So that might be tough for Just a Touch. I like Bergen. I also like Capital Idea a little bit. The 13. The two races he ran, just putting them together and watching the both of them debut. You have a nice start, sits a couple lengths off. He's in between horses. He's traveling well. He just has nowhere to go. He gets bumped. Things get really tight. He closed well that day. He finished third, not even beating the length. And then you get exactly what you're hoping for in the second start. Progression, stepping forward. And he won on a sloppy track, which could play very well on Saturday, but he ran well on a fast track in his debut, and the progression makes sense. It wasn't as if it was an overwhelming jump up after a bad debut race to where I'm just thinking he's an only sloppy track horse either. He can sit nicely off the pace, but if he has to be a little farther back, he got a good trip last time out, but if he has to be a little farther back, I'm not too concerned with it either. I like him in this spot. He's definitely in the pick four for me, Matt.
Yeah, and I think I like it as well. And I love the price at 12-1. I think that's like I said, a really talented horse and one that, like you said, should just set the right type of trip. The one thing I'll mention about a horse like Deterministic, and it's interesting. I just talked to Acacia Clement about this, and she said that Christophe wanted to get Deterministic into a 1-turn mile allowance race, but couldn't really find the right spot for him, and they ended up here.
Cool.
And so it was something where it's like, to your point, like these horses aren't pointing towards the Gotham. They're pointing towards something bigger than this.
Yep.
And so I think a Deterministic's a horse that could end up running well. I think the pace is going to really help him out. I think this horse has the ability to hit the board. But is he going to, it seems like he's fully cranked. His workmate Pandagate actually just won a stakes race last week at Aqueduct. And he's been out working Pandagate. And so, that's promising that he's ready to go. It's not to say he's not 100%, but coming off this long of a layoff, that could be just a pretty tall task. And I think next time out might be the race to, nab Deterministic at a little bit of a price, stretching out and doing 2 turns for the first time. So, it's interesting to see how those, every horse has a story in terms of how they got here. And yeah, I think Capital Idea 12-1 makes a ton of sense for Christophe. I think that one is a good one. And you're right. El Grande is a horse that I like a lot because it's an Aqueduct horse, runs up here a lot for Linda Rice. You're right, Too Good to Lose last time and just got nabbed to the wire.
I forgot how when until watching it back again, I was like, wow, El Grande loses this race. It was one of those where you see it and then you're watching it. It's like, this horse really loses this race. Oh yeah. Just really
Yeah.
gets nailed right on the money.
And, you talk about a horse that can handle an off track. I mean, this is a horse that's
Mhm.
won, it been in the exacta 4 out of 5 times on an off track. So, it is a good horse. I actually like the cutback to a 1 turn mile. I think this horse ultimately is like probably 1 turn mile and 7
Yep.
furlong type of horse.
Third of the
And
form
so,
cycle too, so he could be
yeah,
ready to for one more little step forward up till right around where his best have been, high
yeah,
80s, maybe even can, have a cup of coffee with a 90 buyer if
yeah.
things go well for him.
Yeah, and I think strictly underneath, he's a horse that really does dig in though, and he's shown in
Yes.
the Jerome and the Withers that he can handle open stakes company, and so I don't think this is too big of a task for him. And the nice part was Kendrick got him to. It was a barely, but Kendrick at least got him to rate a little bit
Mhm.
last time out, and not have to get all the way up on the lead, and so that's going to be, I think, important for obviously for Saturday with all of the speed signed on in the race. But yeah, I think, for me, Bergen, top choice, just a touch, obviously very tough. I like your ideas on Capital Idea quite a bit. And this is a horse that, some of these horses are switching off Lasix, but you can say that about a lot of the horses in this field. Christoph has no problems with switching these horses off. And this is one who knows the trip and knows the conditions.
And I've seen you post quite frequently too about McCarthy, someone who does really well with horses outrunning their odds.
Oh, all the time. Trevor gets bombs onto the board more than any jockey I see. That he's just some 49 to 1 horse runs up to for third. And you go, how the hell did this horse hit the board?
Because he was
And then you
trying
look
when a lot of others stopped.
exactly. No, he tries. He tries all the way to the wire. He works hard. And he and Kendrick, I would argue, are the two jockeys on this circuit who adjust most quickly, and Dylan probably as well, adjust most quickly to track conditions. That they, after 1 or 2 races, they go, the rail's dead, get them off the rail. Or the rail's golden, get your horse on the rail at all costs. And they just know how to ride this track on an off day. If it's going to be an off day, Trevor's going to know how to get this horse there by the last race of the card. That's for sure.
Maddie, so appreciative of your time. I know you're a very busy man. You had an extra day of racing this week also there in New York, and you're doing such great work over there. So it was a perfect role and a fit for you with what you had been doing and the way you have established yourself and a following and your credibility, and just people really like you of the last few years on social media and what you did. It was such a perfect spot for you rolling right in there, man. And I'm sure they're really happy with the work you've done because you're crushing it over there. You bring a lot of attention to NYRA and the racing there. And man, you respect racing. You love it. You always do your work. That's what I've always appreciated about you. You take it seriously, because that's one thing you never know who's listening. You never know who you could need to help. And you have helped a lot of people with the work you're putting in, man.
Oh, well, I appreciate the kind words. And it's funny. You're absolutely right about you never know who's listening. And I remember when I was first starting out, um, I got a message from somebody, and I'm not going to name names, but like I got a message from somebody who's like relatively prominent in the industry. And I had like 400 followers on Twitter, and they were like commenting on my show. And I'm like, oh, I guess I should really like assume people are listening to this.
Yeah.
And yeah, you never know who's listening. And I would encourage people who are starting out, whether it's in horse racing or any profession, quite frankly, that yeah, you never know who's listening, and always put forth your best effort, do your homework. And I think you and I are so similar in that we both like to show our notes. We like to show our work.
Yes.
We might not end up with the right answer, but you're always going to understand how we got to where we did. And I think
That's helpful. Why, and I'm sure that a lot of that is for you too. The reason why I do that is because that's what is helpful for me when I'm watching and listening other people
100%.
talk about races or football or basketball, and how I learn every year more DVOA stats and EPA stats and different stats to use, and how I can, and that's what now things like DRF Formulator will give you, the opportunity to find different ways to enhance your handicapping. What can I do that I wasn't doing a few months ago or a couple years ago? And always try to improve yourself a little bit more and more and more. Maddie, fun weekend coming up. And now with Santa Anita pushing to Sunday, we'll really be looking at Gulfstream and Aqueduct firing away at both tracks that have really big days and really good cars. Late pick 4 with all 4 stakes races. We will be following you at Failed to Menace. Anything you want to mention or anything you want to plug that you got coming up in the next few days?
Obviously, just a ton of coverage on Naira Bets for all those races that you mentioned. Got a stakes preview of the Fountain of Youth, the Battaglia, obviously the Gotham, but as well as the San Felipe and a bunch of the undercard races at Gulfstream as well. Stakes previews for all of those. So just a lot of great content there. We got a great Kentucky Derby promotion on Naira Bets as well. If you opt in, kind of a money back guarantee thing. So make sure to check that out on Naira Bets. But yeah, always something. If you follow me on Twitter at Failed to Menace, you'll be able to catch it all.
Folks, thanks so much for hanging out with us. If you're listening on the podcast, we have a lot more coverage coming of the different big days around the country. If you are watching the video on any social medias and you want some help with Gulfstream Park, Barry Spears joined me to look at races 7 through 14 on a huge stakes card at Gulfstream on Saturday. And then later on Friday, I believe Angela Herman is going to join me to talk about Santa Anita on their stakes races that have been moved to the Sunday card. So we'll get you all covered with the big races coming up this weekend. And hopefully we can get Matt back in a few weeks on the Wood Memorial Day to talk about another big day coming up in New York. Matty, buddy, thanks so much again, man. Crush it this weekend. Good luck in all your plays, and we'll talk again real soon.
Thanks so much, Gino. You too.
Folks, we'll be back with plenty more coming soon. Thanks for hanging out.